the Healthcare Quality Podcast. My name is David Kashmir. I'm a surgeon and MBA who's also a Lean Six Sigma Master Black Belt. I'm very interested in the tools of statistical process control and how we get others in our field to use these tools. Today, as part of an ongoing segment on the Healthcare Quality Podcast, I'm going to share with you some interesting facts about social media, some of those tools we can use to get the message out, whatever our message is. So today is sort of episode 1 of Social Media Sunday, our ongoing feature about social media and new tools, tips, and tricks for how to get the message out there, whatever your message may be. One of the first questions is, why bother with social media? And you can see up here we have a hashtag abbreviation. Hashtag, this number sign, SoMe, social media. Hashtags are commonly used on social media to make indexable or searchable terms. This sign wasn't really doing much originally, and people said, well, what can we do with this? And it became, really years ago now, a way to index things on the web. So we're able to find different things with hashtag. So hashtag SoMe is social media. In terms of why bother with social media, it turns out that social media is underused. So first, you can. It's a wide open field not many physicians and healthcare providers use. It turns out only about 20% of physicians use it, and of those, only 6% use certain platforms like Twitter. So of the 20% who use it, only 6% of physicians use Twitter at all. There are lots of reasons for that, and some of them we'll discuss in just a bit. Another why bother with social media includes that we often have a lack of control as physicians over content that's put about us on the web. Different things can end up on doc rating sites or home pages for different companies that we really can't influence much and can't control. So one of the why bothers with social media is that we often have a lack of control over content that's all about us. Another important factor to consider when you ask, why bother with social media, is something called the H-index. The H-index is something that's been around for years, and if you're an academic physician, you may know all about it already. It's one of the ways to measure the quality and quantity and citation number of times cited for your work. Its full name is the Hirsch Index, and it came from a theoretical physicist who used it to measure the quality of work for theoretical physicists. So this H-index was a measure of kind of the virality of ideas long before social media existed. So really, in academic circles, this concept of getting the message out there and getting things retweeted or referenced or used has been there. And this concept of virality, or the ability of an idea or meme to replicate across the web, well, it was sort of there for a long time already and embodied in academic institutions with the Hirsch Index, at least to a point. So I want us to understand that, in a way, certain elements of physician practice and physician group were already using some measure of virality. We'll talk a little bit more about virality later on, but again, virality is this concept of infectiousness of ideas. There are all kinds of studies about what makes ideas infectious. The University of Pennsylvania has coursework on stickiness and virality, and it turns out strong emotions behind a tweet or a sentence or a phrase or a blog entry, certain strong emotions are more likely to make something, quote, go viral. Two of the most common emotions are happiness and anger. These are two of the most common emotions that lead to virality. We'll talk about how that works for and against us at another time as we go along. But for now, just remember, the H-index was a measure of sort of virality that predates a lot of the social media tools we'll talk about. So why bother? Well, it's kind of been done for some time already. Other why bothers with social media, it allows a broader reach. It allows you to connect with colleagues from all over the world. Interesting findings can be disseminated faster. Of course, this decreases the amount of time that they are vet before they're released. So on the one hand, we may have more ideas. On the other hand, the quality ideas may be different. Now, of course, that was part of the argument against the printing press too early on. But I would just share that social media allows us to have ideas spread more quickly. Again, it's not a commentary on the quality of those ideas. It leads to a cross-pollination of ideas across different parts of the world, and it can help us determine and learn from trends across the pond. So we can learn from our colleagues in England and all around the world how they practice and why, and what we can take home here for patient safety, quality, and excellent outcomes. Another thing is this gives us an opportunity to start a movement. Some social movements, like Women in Surgery or hashtag I Look Like a Surgeon, were started in social media and have really caught on. So it's the opportunity to reach people on a visceral level, to connect and to popularize an idea. And now the word of caution. Social media, some think, is akin to playing with fire. You're putting yourself out there. You likely will be criticized. Not everyone will like everything you have to say. People may comment both positively, which is great, and negatively. So my recommendation is think before you make content and put it out there. Whether that be tweeting, posting on LinkedIn, Facebook, whichever platform you may use, and we'll talk more about some of those later. Think before you tweet. And more than just think, put some physical clicks, put some clicks of the mouse between you and the world. That's kind of one of the important take-homes from our time together in a nutshell. Put some clicks between you and the world, especially if you use social media for professional presentations. Don't make it that pushing one button leads to a post that the whole world can see and save and disseminate beyond you. There are horror stories of people making a rash Twitter comment, a tweet, and then getting on a plane, and then landing only to find that it has gone viral and they've lost their job. That's happened. And so I would just share, or at least the stories out there that it happened. It's hard to sort of verify, but it did make the news. So I would just say, put some clicks between you and the rest of the world. Put some clicks between your social media accounts and how you're able to post things. I can't say that enough. And there are different techniques to do that. Using or enabling two-step verification, so that when you're angry and you're trying to type a password in to get into the application to post an angry tweet, you can't do it with just one step. Most applications like Twitter and LinkedIn can enable two-step verification with just a click of your phone. And that puts one more barrier, one more hurdle between you and a thoughtless post. Those and other techniques are key with social media. Well, here's a story about how social media is important and why we should bother as physicians, at least being familiar with it and often even using it. Once upon a time, a young physician worked for a large organization that placed him on social media. It sounds great, but it turns out that there was a parting of the ways, and the physician and the organization went their separate ways. But unfortunately, for the rest of, time, that physician was stuck online in every search related to that organization. And when the physician was searched for, that organization always came up prominently above both his current organization and other content that was very positive about the physician. Now, it turns out what the business had said was in no way negative about the physician. It was just not what that doctor wanted to have highlighted. So that story is from a colleague of mine, and here's another one that's sort of similar. And my disclaimer for this story is this is not me as the physician. But once upon a time, a young physician was on a doctor rating site, and there are lots of those now. Angie's List, there are several. And the physician, unfortunately, was trolled by a user. Now, trolling is a term you probably know about already, where someone kind of acts like a troll. They write down really some of the worst comments you could to either mock the user or make them look bad for some reason. And again, this is a physician rating site. This is the physician's livelihood, and these anonymous ratings could occur. And the commentary could really be anonymous because it is challenging to vet these users. It may have not even been a patient of the physician. So this inaccurate review was costly. The physician was in private practice, and they felt he and his team felt it really hurt them. I've seen a similar case for a female physician I should say that differently. For a physician who happened to be a female who had a similar issue, hers was with a challenging patient who had some drug-related issues with pain medication. And the bottom line is that was very challenging to remove from social media. So in part, why bother? Well, on the one hand, you may want to highlight certain content about yourself and not have other content be as prevalent. It doesn't mean that other content was bad, but you may just not want that to be the first thing people find. Similarly, in this case, a young physician had really inaccurate reviews that were very challenging to review, and that's a case where it was actually deleterious information that was hard to remove. And I've seen similar issues with some advanced practitioner colleagues. It can be very challenging. We see a lot of people as physicians, and we see them at times in their lives where they're sick and they're not quite themselves. They may be on medication or otherwise. And we also may have an advanced practitioner. Our advanced practitioner colleagues see a lot of patients at tough times in their lives. Not all the reviews will be good for different reasons, only some of which relate to the provider. Another key point is that social media is more than just yelling at the biggest audience you can find. There are lots of platforms to get your message out, and each one works differently. Interestingly, there are different best times to post on each social media platform in order to be able to get the most hits or connections to the content and the message you're trying to put out. Each one works very differently. There are lots of reviews online that will tell you what time to post on Twitter, LinkedIn, etc. So there are best times to post, and ways to involve people for each platform. There's a well-known Harvard Business Review article that describes what the best tweets look like in terms of engagement and involving people. Just interesting that social media makes such well-renowned or well-regarded journals. And in that particular study, it says that questions seem to resonate better, seem to get more views. And of course, those tweets that have associated visual content like photos or a video seem to work very well. So, despite those factors, social media is more than just finding the biggest audience you can and just trying to grab onto it. Focused content tends to be much more useful, focused toward a particular segment of an audience, than just content for everyone. To do that, there are several ways to get at that. One is to find a niche and develop it. Another is to have your own domain. Having your own domain allows you to target things particularly how you want to particular groups that you want to access. That can be harder if your website is made in a different way, like having a weblog, again a blog, with Google, with Blogger owned by Google. It can be more challenging to focus on a particular audience. It can be harder to tell where your clicks are coming from, but those things are easier with your own domain. With your own domain, you'll own that content on your domain, hosted by whichever service you choose, rather than one of the third-party services. We'll talk some more about those in just a moment. You should probably have some ways to track users who come to your website or hear your message, and there are tools like statcounter.com, which can be installed in the back end of your website. Now, websites are made in different ways nowadays. One of the most common is WordPress. It's particularly friendly for blogs. It's easy to learn, and it's straightforward to install on your own domain, hosted wherever you'd like. I'm not a computer coder by any means, and it was very straightforward for me to get this done. You can view how that blog looks here at surgicalbusinessmodelinnovation.com, and I also ask you to learn from me and get a shorter name for your blog, but get one that says what it's about. In addition to tracking users, another interesting and useful tactic is to remember that targeting to a certain audience is probably better than massive online sharing. And the way to do that is by incorporating things like hashtags, which become searchable terms, and different factors like that. Again, targeted, not yelling at the biggest audience you can find. Remember, with things like owning your own domain and installing WordPress yourself, you have more of an ability to control the content that you've created. After all, one of the big questions is, well, who owns the content that you make? Well, who should own the content that you make? Well, to a large degree, you as the person who's getting your message out there, whether it's about your academic work, social idea or movement, or whatever you choose, it's useful for you to own your content. And again, one of the ways to do that is for you to set up your own domain and to focus it at a certain group. Here are some useful social media tools, and we'll talk about these in sequence and kind of what each one is and what they do, and some of my experiences with each one. So to do that, we're going to come over here. And one of the first ones is called Periscope. Periscope is owned by Twitter, and Periscope allows you to use a Twitter account to start up a video entry. These are brief entries taken all with your smartphone that are then viewable all around the world. And you can tune into people all around the world who are speaking into a camera or doing work or whatever they choose to be doing. And it can allow people to access things like the making of your podcast or some content that you wish to highlight. So Periscope is useful for these brief video snippets, and it will post to your Twitter account, hey, I'm doing one of these, come on over and take a look. Different types of content are key to engage people. Not everyone can see, not everyone can hear, and it is useful to have engaging content that is audio-based, video-based, and some that are text-focused. Another useful social media tactic is to have a podcast. They're not hard to do, and they're not only straightforward to make, but they're easily accessible. With a SoundCloud account, you can upload your podcast, and here we have the Healthcare Quality Podcast. And uploading that podcast will allow you to put it onto iTunes and have listeners access your content that way. As you make a podcast, you can take audio from it and then take that audio and have it transcribed into a blog entry or do what you choose with it. So repurposing content and getting the message out in several ways is key here. You can have a podcast homepage where you put your podcasts from SoundCloud and where you have a video podcast also. And again, YouTube is very happy to host your video podcasts. Here's a WordPress blog, and this is what it looks like when you're editing it. And it'll give you a dashboard on the other side here. And with your dashboard, you can answer comments, you can look at who's reading things, you can use a stats counter plugin to see where people are coming from. It gets to be very useful and interesting to see who your readers are. So this is Stat Counter. They're one of many options. It has a free version, and it links to your site and just can tell you all about who's going where and what's happening. So those are just some of the social media tools that I've used and I've had a good experience with that can allow you to focus your content on certain parts of the world, certain people who are interested in what you're interested in or the message you're sending, and then it can allow you to highlight content or specific thoughts about different factors. Now there are others. We talked about Twitter. Twitter allows you to publish these brief snippets with links to different content around the web. And I do want to share with you a useful tool called a URL shortener. A URL shortener is one that takes a long address from the web, like this one, and a URL shortener will take your URL and give you a tiny URL, this. So you can copy that or use a similar URL shortener. You can copy that and you can put that into a tweet or a similar platform that restricts the number of characters you get to use. So Twitter allows only brief messages. If you use all that, putting a web page in, it won't work so well. So they allow you to use a URL shortener, okay? And when users click on that, it takes you to wherever you're sending them. So a URL shortener is a useful tool for social media, especially when you're using a platform like Twitter. Then there are automation tools like Hootsuite, and there are several of these, which allow you to take tweets and different content, make it up when you have time, and then it'll push that out at regular intervals for you, intervals you set, so that you don't have to be there, clicking away on your phone, etc. So you can kind of have the computer do any work for you. LinkedIn is one that you know. You may be accessing this video through LinkedIn. LinkedIn's useful. It lets you publish content and posts. SlideShare lets you publish slides to the world. And this is very interesting. SlideShare has a huge membership, which very few people realize in terms of how big it is. And SlideShare is useful for saying, hey, I'm about to put out a new blog entry. You make out one slide and you put it on there. And it can attract a very large audience. ScreenFlow is another useful social media tool. And ScreenFlow takes whatever is on your screen and makes a video of it. It'll make a video and it'll record your computer's audio, and it lets you package those into something like a video podcast. And then SoundCloud we discussed as a host site for you to put a podcast up or an audio of your blog entry. So on Social Media Sunday, here are the parting words. First, it's probably worthwhile to bother with social media before you have an issue or a problem. Social media in a lot of ways is like your ultimate permanent record. What we say and do on here lingers for a long time. And it's sort of funny sometimes to look back at yourself and say, oh my gosh, I looked so different back then, or things were so different. And that's no big deal. But also social media can act as a record, really the kind of which you don't want. It can have reviews that have nothing to do with you. It can link you to organizations, people, and places which really doesn't work well. And it can promote certain, it can use different things like your image to promote something that is not you, and that can, or you're not associated with, and that can be challenging. So if you're going to bother with social media, it's useful to bother with it on your terms and do it early, however you choose to do that. Remember, in a lot of ways, the concept of virality, or spreading your message, has been around for some time longer than social media. And one of the common ways we see that is by thinking of the H-index, which is that Hirsch index used in academic circles to measure how often your work is cited in a journal or paper or something similar. And as you know, journals have impact factors that demonstrate how often they're used. Well, this idea of virality, of scientific themes and thoughts, is very similar to a lot of the concept of virality in social media. It can be used as a way to promote your science. It can be used as a way to promote a certain line of thinking, and it can be used responsibly. And that's the key. You need to use social media responsibly to work with a focused crowd. And again, one of the ways to do that is to put some clicks between you and the rest of the world so that you don't have something happen when you're angry or extraordinarily happy that just looks really foolish afterward. We talked about how happiness, and particularly anger, is associated with virality. Angry messages and happy messages do tend to have a message go viral or explode across the web, much more commonly than other messages. Again, you have to be careful with it. It is sort of one of the challenges of social media to keep it in the park. Make sure that the content is useful and engaging, but tweeting things that are angry, boy, that can be difficult. So put some clicks between you and the rest of the world. There are lots of social media tools, and they don't need to be expensive. A domain can be as little as $6 a year. Your WordPress upload can be very inexpensive, if not free, and much of the content, including photos, is also free or near free. So the tools don't need to cost a lot of money. They need to cost very little to get done an effective podcast or blog, etc. If you have questions about social media or how to deploy it, some of the advanced techniques or some of the things that I've seen, I'm always happy to talk about it. You can send me an email at D as in David, M as in Mary, Kashmir at thesurgicallab.com. I'm happy to help out or hear about your experiences with social media. And remember, this will be part of the podcast's ongoing feature of Social Media Sundays, where we talk about new tools or new tips that we've discovered as a group and that I like to share with you. Have a great day.